Okay, excellent. I am now live. For some reason, it took several seconds for that to load. My computer has been giving me issues so much in the past few weeks. Okay, but anyway, enough about me. The point of this video is policy. And there are a lot of progressives, a lot of people on the left who love to rehabilitate Jimmy Carter and pretend he's some sort of saint, dove, non interventionist, anti war. And that is all a bunch of malarkey. There is nothing anti war about Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is much like all of the post World War II presidents, as well as most of the pre World War II presidents. And let's take a look at his foreign policy. But first things first, Jimmy Carter is not progressive in any way, whether it be domestic or foreign. You can make the argument that he's the first neoliberal president. So let's take a look at his foreign policies first. So first and foremost, Jimmy Carter aided and abetted a genocide in Indonesia. Indonesia was doing a genocide of East Timor, and Jimmy Carter sold weapons to Indonesia, and he kept supplying them with lots of weapons as they were doing a genocide in East Timor. And when Congress passed a resolution to ban the sale of weapons to the Indonesian genocide, Jimmy Carter bypassed it. President Jimmy Carter had Vice President Fritz Mondale go to Israel and get Israel to supply U.S. Skyhawks to Indonesia. And let me ask you, we U.S. progressives rightfully criticized Donald Trump, who was aiding and abetting a genocide in Yemen. Donald Trump was selling weapons to Saudi Arabia while they were doing a genocide in Yemen. So how is what's Jimmy Carter doing different from that? Answer my question. Of course, you might say, well, Donald Trump was doing it because he was corrupt and the Saudi Arabians were giving him money for his hotel, so that's why he gave him the weapons deals, whereas Jimmy Carter was just doing it to do it. I mean, it's still bad. It's still aiding and abetting a genocide. It's still a war crime, so. Anyway, in South Africa, Jimmy Carter continued support of the apartheid regime, and he made deals with the People's Republic of China to send more military equipment and transfer it to fight the Marxist government in Angola. And Jimmy Carter backed a lot of shady things in Angola and in South Africa. And in Vietnam, Jimmy Carter did a lot of shady stuff. He wanted to punish Vietnam. He wanted to encourage other nations to reduce aid to Hanoi. He increased military aid to Thailand. Jimmy Carter also led Operation Cyclone, which created the Mujahideen. And Jimmy Carter did that to overthrow the government of Afghanistan. And of course, everyone rightfully blames Ronald Reagan for Afghanistan. But the truth is, Jimmy Carter is also to blame because Jimmy Carter was the one who created the Mujahideen to overthrow the government of Afghanistan. And then Ronald Reagan came along and he funded the Mujahideen, gave money to the Mujahideen, and used them as a deterrent against the Soviet Union. And then, of course, the Mujahideen splintered, became Al Qaeda and Taliban, and then the rest is history. But the point is, Jimmy Carter is at the source for the problems that were caused in Afghanistan. Also, Jimmy Carter supported the dictator in Nicaragua. And for Iraq, while it is speculation, there is plenty of stuff to suggest that Jimmy Carter reached out to Saddam Hussein and convinced him to invade Iran. And there is, of course, also evidence to suggest that Jimmy Carter, before reaching out to Saddam Hussein, had tried to have the Iranian revolution brutally suppressed. And also, now let's get to Jimmy Carter's domestic policies. But before we do that, the point here is, are Jimmy Carter's foreign policies really that different from the foreign policies of other presidents? Not really. It's just the way in which he markets them and pretends that he's some sort of dovish saint. Whereas if you look at his real policies, they're not so good now, are they? Now, there was a myth that Jimmy Carter was a supporter of the working class and he supported unions. He never supported unions. He sometimes paid lip service to unions, but really he was very, in public, he was a little ambivalent and he he was sort of like talking out of both sides of his mouth, and he wasn't really sure. He didn't really seem sure that he supported unions or didn't support unions. But in reality, here's what really happened. Jimmy Carter deregulated many sectors of the American economy, and he benefited lots of corporations. And Jimmy Carter in public pretended to support Black lung victims, whereas in private, he would say that the victims chose to be coal miners, chose to be miners. And in private, he was telling his corporate buddies that he was going to oppose unions and screw them over. And so that's why the unions turned on him in the election of 1980. They went and joined Ronald Reagan because they thought Ronald Reagan, who was the chairman of the Screen Actors Guild, Ronald Reagan was the head of the union. They thought that he would help unions. Of course, Ronald Reagan then turned around and destroyed unions in the United States when he became president. Cut the bridge behind you. And so that was a mistake too. But the point is, the reason that they abandoned Jimmy Carter was because Jimmy Carter did not support them. And so there's a big reason why Jimmy Carter lost the election of 1980, and it's because he was a terrible president, but not for the policies that the right wing pretends. Of course, the left wing, the progressives, pretend that Jimmy Carter was a dovish, non-interventionist, anti-war, some sort of saint who was also progressive. Whereas none of that is true. Really, the opposite is true. And whereas the right wing also pretends that Jimmy Carter was dovish and anti-war, and they use that to criticize him. Whereas Jimmy Carter's foreign policies and domestic policies are very similar to that of Republicans. And while he's not as destructive as Ronald Reagan, there's not much of a contrast between his policies. It's like comparing Obama and Trump. Both Obama and Trump escalated the drone war significantly. Both Obama and Trump stayed in Iraq, stayed in Afghanistan. Actually, Obama got out of Iraq and then went back into Iraq. But anyway, and then both Obama and Trump did many questionable things. And questionable is way too kind of putting it. Donald Trump assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Barack Obama tried to put nuclear missiles in South Korea. And yeah. So whereas Obama is not as destructive as Trump, their foreign policies aren't too different, and neither are domestic policies, because Obama bailed out Wall Street. Donald Trump gave a tax cut to the wealthy that benefited, where 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Both Obama and Trump did lots of deregulation and lots of outsourcing, outsourced a lot of jobs. We're going to send your jobs overseas. We're going to keep them overseas, basically. So in the same way, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, their foreign policies and the domestic policies aren't that different. And that's one big reason why Jimmy Carter lost the election of 1980, because people had lost faith in him, because they saw his policies and they realized he wasn't the same progressive as like Lyndon Johnson or Franklin Roosevelt. And of course, Lyndon Johnson was horrible on foreign policy, but his domestic policy had been very progressive, whereas Jimmy Carter wasn't even trying on the domestic front. And so, yeah, I really want to dispel the myth, the total myth that Jimmy Carter was progressive, the total lie that Jimmy Carter was anti-war, because none of that is true. But of course, I have to be fair and point out some of the good things that Jimmy Carter did. For instance, Jimmy Carter wanted to get the U.S. military out of South Korea. He tried to withdraw the troops. Of course, he did not succeed there, so he was also a failure in that one good area that he tried to be good in. And of course, Jimmy Carter famously in 1994, when many years after he'd been president, he went to North Korea personally and had the little negotiation and stuff. But before that, while he was president in the 1970s, he'd actually tried to do negotiations with North Korea. So that's also a good thing. That Jimmy Carter did. And of course, Bill Clinton, who was also a horrible president, deregulated lots of things. That Telecommunications Act, repeal of Glass-Steagall, Bill Clinton was awful too, but Bill Clinton also negotiated with North Korea, for which he should be given credit as well. And Donald Trump negotiated with North Korea a little bit, which he should be given credit, although Donald Trump allowed John Bolton to basically mess all that up, and Donald Trump didn't really give any substantive policy concessions to North Korea, which is why the talks failed. And I should also mention that Bill Clinton, his negotiations with North Korea were very diplomatic and going well, but then George W. Bush came along and tanked all the negotiations with North Korea, and that's why relations got bad again. It was Bush's fault. But anyway, yeah, whenever I talk about policies, I have to talk about other policies. Like I've talked about the policies of Jimmy Carter, and I've gone to the policies of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Donald Trump and all that, Donald J. Trump and all that. So, I mean, it's what happens because all these policies are related and very consequential and in sequence with each other. Now, yeah, I'm just trying to think if I missed anything, because when I'm doing these YouTube videos live, I'm recording, I'm talking, and then maybe I lose my train of thought a little bit. Still a little new to this YouTube thing. Watch and subscribe and share this video. Okay, now I'm rambling, but my point is Jimmy Carter was a neoliberal, corporatist, warmonger. And instead of being a hypocrite and calling out other warmongers, maybe he should take a look at himself and realize what he is. And of course, the other counter argument that people will make is, well, Jimmy Carter uses anti-war rhetoric and anti-war language. So what? Barack Obama used anti-war rhetoric. Donald Trump used anti-war rhetoric. Richard Nixon used anti-war rhetoric before he did a genocide in Southeast Asia. And Richard Nixon also overthrew the government of Chile, President Salvador Allende, because the government of Chile nationalized the copper mines. And of course, the United States couldn't have that. Anyway, but speaking of Chile, you heard that they elected a new president who's on the left. So that's going to be positive for them. So good for them. But I mean, they wouldn't have been put in a bad position of a neoliberal and dictatorial rule if Richard Nixon had never overthrown their president Salvador Allende. So if that had never happened, this good news of the recent leftist being elected president in Chile would have come much earlier. So just a food for thought, but of course it is something to celebrate. But yes, point is, do not rehabilitate Jimmy Carter. There is nothing to rehabilitate about him. He is no different than many, many other presidents, and their policies are all to be criticized. I don't care that he builds houses. I don't care that he did some work for some virus or whatever. It matters what he did while he had power over policy. And his policies were disastrous because they were very similar to that of Bill Clinton's and Barack Obama's and Joe Biden's and Donald Trump's and Ronald Reagan's and George Bush's. And another thing, it's very easy to rehabilitate people when they live for a long time after they were in power. So, for instance, Herbert Hoover lived for 31 years after he left the presidency. And Herbert Hoover was the dude who was the Secretary of Commerce under Calvin Coolidge. Herbert Hoover was complicit in all of Calvin Coolidge's deregulation, union busting, and tax cuts for the rich. And Herbert Hoover became president. And under Herbert Hoover, the Great Depression happened because of Calvin Coolidge's policies. And Herbert Hoover was responsible for cutting taxes, more taxes on the wealthy, and deregulating even more, and that led to more problems. World War I veterans on the street, homeless, and Herbert Hoover also tried to forcibly assimilate many Native Americans. And so, but Herbert Hoover was rehabilitated, led back into polite society because, he was friends with Harry S. Truman and Lyndon Baines Johnson and Dwight David Eisenhower. And Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson basically rehabilitated Herbert Hoover and led him back into polite society. And Herbert Hoover even went on some missions for Harry Truman. And yeah, so the longer the people live after they have been president, the easier it is to rehabilitate them. The more time has passed, people look at people and they're like, oh, well, that person was terrible, but I'm going to ignore that the fact that the person was terrible and totally ignore policies and be non-substantive. And that's what I'm going to do. So now rehabilitate everyone. Hooray. Like, that's the crazy stuff that happens. So always be substantive and policy based and think about real issues. And another argument that people use is that, well, everyone does it. All the presidents have done something bad, like a war crime. Well, if everyone was cheating on tests or uh, dr- running over people with cars or cussing out people or driving cars into people's houses or pushing and punching and beating up people or lying and plagiarizing, if everyone was doing all those things, would that make those things okay? No, they would not be okay. They would still be wrong, morally wrong, and they would still be punishable crimes. So why is it okay when presidents commit war crimes, which are much worse than the things that I just described? No, it's even worse. It's even worse in those cases. So you should not be rehabilitating anyone or making excuses for anyone. And the real reason people make excuses for all these war crimes and all this stuff is because they want to make excuses for themselves. They want to make it so that whenever they do something bad, they can be like, oh, President so and so, President William McKinley massacred civilians and did an illegal war based on lies because he heard voices from God and he did all those bad foreign policies. So it's okay when I do something bad because someone else did something worse or something similar to that nature, and I want to make excuses for myself. So stop with this ridiculous rehabilitation and stop rehabilitating Jimmy Carter, please, for the love of God. Which is what Jimmy Carter actually believes in, by the way. Or says he does. I mean, that's really irrelevant. And of course, the final point to make is that Jimmy Carter made a big deal of the fact that he believed in God, which, okay, like, that's not really important how you govern, and why you keep bringing religion into politics is just nonsense. But the point is, policies matter, substance matters. Stop rehabilitating people who had horrible, destructive policies.